family are ignored. All of these things are not assumed to interfere with being born again. But to be born again with them is to be just the same as you were before. Instead of a new birth, it's just a new name for the same old things that you always problemed. Now, out of this, there's something more, though, than just keeping the morality straight. It is part of this business of being quiet. Every agitation, every intensity of negative attitude is dangerous to the inner life of the person. Therefore, we say that when we want the individual to be still and know, we want the individual to change his entire basic formula for life. It doesn't mean he can't speak. It doesn't mean he can't have ideas. But he has to have only things that work together for good. The body, mind, emotions must be brought into harmonic relationships. There must be no discords in the compound of the person. It doesn't mean he necessarily is awfully well advanced. He isn't perfect. He isn't above making an occasional mistake. But when he makes a mistake, he knows it and he's sorry. And when he's not too wise, he may be much deeper in the mysteries of his own inner life. So the problem is that stillness now is the end of conflict, not the end of function. It is that no longer will the individual be in a continuous disturbance with himself. He will not regret what he did yesterday and build a new regret today. Pythagoras advised this doctrine of recollections to accomplish freedom from habit patterns. He advised his disciples that every day they should live their lives over again backward for that day. See what they did right and what they did wrong, and determine to correct any mistake that was made during that day. Recognize it, correct it, and outgrow it, and reach the condition in which it would not be repeated. So what we're asking for, really, is a good-natured person of kindly disposition who has managed to get over griefs and grievances, who is able to live in pleasant relationships with other people, who is not jealous, who does not tear down reputations, and doesn't lock in feuds with anybody, who holds no violent dislikes over subjects they do not understand, do not take sides on problems they do not know, but whatever happens, remain open and ever watching for the good, and watching and rewarding only the best of their own conduct. This means a more or less simple life. One way that the medievals found to gain this simple life was by joining the clergy. They became monks, lived in monasteries, worked in gardens, spent most of their time in prayer and meditation. But this didn't work quite well either, for in this case, the isolation was the individual arming himself against himself. He was determined to destroy the opportunities to make mistakes and gain virtue in that way. It's not done that way. It doesn't work. The individual does not recover from his mistakes because he locks himself away from temptation. Because temptation is still there, and all kinds of internal pressures affect him and afflict him even while he is in a monastic existence. The answer to the whole thing was, stay in the world, but be able to live your own inner life without worry and fear, and if other people wish to ridicule it, let them. But do not resent their ridicule. It's not worth it. Do that which your inner life tells you is right. And in order to do that, you have to get a message. Now, messages coming from the inner life are often mistaken. Very often what we consider to be a vision is merely a way of supporting our own personal attitudes. When visions begin to support our right to be wrong, we have a good reason to question the visions. Visions can be nothing but nightmares. They can be nothing but psychological expressions of our own defects. They can reveal to a clinical trained psychiatrist or psychologist just what is wrong with our dispositions and why we are in trouble. This type of vision or dream is of no basic value except as a warning, and the individual does not need to have an elaborate analysis of this. For if he has pressures, he will have dreams, and most of the dreams will be related to his pressures, either justifying them or trying to help him to fulfill the things that have created the pressures. So we don't go on that level. But if there are no pressures, if there are no intensities, if the individual is living a very quiet, reasonable, and natural life, perhaps he'll be a little like Jacob Boehme, the great German mystic. He was raised and educated as a shoemaker. He was an apprentice shoemaker. Finally, we got his papers and became a master shoemaker and lived in the little town of Görlitz all his life. He was married and had children. He attended the Lutheran Church, and he was a very simple person with only the education possible from a local school, which probably taught him only enough to read the Bible. So this man quietly, peacefully made a strange compact with himself. He resolved to live as best he could in his simple way, the best he knew. And he was a very quiet man and a very charitable man. And when the Lutheran communion turned against him, very bitter, he never for one moment showed the slightest resentment. While they were denouncing him in the church, he was sitting in his pew and listening to it. He was unwilling to even pick a quarrel with the men who were accusing him of heresy. Fortunately, at that time, the Inquisition was not in control in Germany, so all they could do was downgrade him. But actually, in this very simple family way, they say a very wonderful father, a faithful husband, a good friend, and an absolutely honest craftsman who marked every shoe he made and guaranteed it. To this simple man came some of the most extraordinary visions recorded in history. One day, while he was working in his shop, he had a chance to look up, and he saw a ray of light striking a pewter plate on the wall. This ray of light struck him in the eyes, and in that moment he had a vision of another world. And this vision he had of another world had none of the peculiarities that we associate with sectarianism. It was a world which he had not even a terminology for. He borrowed all kinds of words from his friends and neighbors, because he had no words. He also was able to gain some terminology from alchemy and astrology and other subjects, but he used them always in his own way, not the way they were originally being used in the communities. Little by little, Boehme discovered in himself a strange and wonderful truth that was the basis of all his thinking and all his living. He said that in the very beginning there was nothing in the universe but peace, that this peace reached everywhere, and everyone was in peace with everyone else. And they talked to God, and God answered them in the voice of a small child, a very gentle child, not much older than themselves, because he was speaking to common people and not to great scholars. And they were all peaceful until along came Lucifer. And Lucifer was self-will, and by self-will fell the angels. And when Lucifer asked deity for certain privileges, he was a faithful cherub at that time, God spoke again in the voice of the little child and said what was necessary. And Lucifer said, "Oh no, I don't like this. I don't want to live in a universe that is ruled by a small child. And if the deity can't speak out the great and glorious words I want to hear, I'm going to take over the job. Remember, this is in Low Dutch in Germany. So he said, I'm going to take over. I'm going to run the universe now. So he challenged deity. He said, I'm not going to do these things. If you're just a puny little deity living in a space without anything around you except a baby voice, I'm going to show you how to run this thing. And at the moment that he said that was the moment of the great disobedience. And in an instant, the heavens completely changed. Everything changed. The sky was filled with great spiritual powers. In the midst of them was seated or placed the ineffable deity, with all power, all splendor, all skills, and the thunder and rumbling voice that could be heard everywhere. And it is thus that the pride of Lucifer opened the abyss of the self, opened the world of sorrow and pain, because he tried to take over the management of the universe, and because he could see no God until he disobeyed, and then the whole glory of heaven broke upon him. Now there's something about this. It's almost a beautiful myth or legend that can be carried right on down. For man taking over the universe because God didn't seem big enough to handle the job is something that we all might think about occasionally. Also in all the problems that we have. When we think of the universal divine plan as too weak to handle us, to take care of our problems, so that we have to suddenly become helpers in this deal, we may get into serious trouble. But Bamey was essentially a great mystic, and he pointed out that when the human being becomes aware of the realities and uses them properly, the great grief or the great sorrow fades away again, and man and God live together in infinite community, always man obeying that which was eternally ordained to be obeyed. So in this way, Bamey had his statement of silence, of peace, that was disrupted by the rise of human faults, human emergencies, and the forever human optimism and complacency. So that to be still is to know the universe as stillness. To be still is to hear the voice of God and the voice of a small child. To disobey is to bring down upon oneself the thunder of an absolutely immutable power. To obey, we do not know there are laws. When we break them, we discover to our sorrow that we have not been very wise. So we're going to try to think in terms of a quietude that is free from ulterior motive. And this was what Zen attempted to do in India. And this is what Taoism attempted to do in China. This also is the mystery of Neoplatonism and the ideals of Pythagoras. It was the idea that man only comes into trouble when he does it wrong. As long as he is right, he doesn't know there are any laws, because by keeping them perfectly, everything is serene and well balanced. But the moment self-interest takes over, the power of the abyss is loosened upon us. So we think now of quietude as just quietly doing the things that are right, peacefully doing the things that must be done in peace, and performing all good deeds in the name of the one sovereign good upon which we all depend, and from which we must gain all our life and resource. Now, the mystics have found out that if we live this quiet inner life, that we can carry every responsibility of the outer life with dignity. There is no need for us to go around depriving ourselves of everything, We only have to deprive ourselves of those things